I don't regret what I did because the way I was treated deserved it, but let's take it in order. I, 30M, met my wife, Marlene, 28F, about 3 years ago. It was one of those random things. A buddy of mine had a party, and Marlene happened to be there. We got to talking, and before I knew it, we'd been locked in conversation for hours. I remember the energy between us. She was smart, driven, with a sense of humor that kept me on my toes. I hadn't felt that with anyone in years. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and everything just kind of snowballed from there. One thing that struck me early on was how similar our backgrounds were. See, both of us had gone through some rough family stuff. Marlene's mom passed away when she was a teenager, and her dad eventually remarried a woman named Dana, who became Marlene's stepmother. Dana wasn't exactly popular with Marlene at first, and she didn't even seem like the type to want to play mom. But over the years, they found common ground, and Marlene grew to respect her, especially after her dad passed. Dana's not some typical, overbearing stepmom. She's pretty laid back, and despite the rough start, she's become a good friend to Marlene. On my end, my mom passed away when I was younger, too, leaving just me and my dad. My dad's always been a strong figure in my life, but the loneliness from that kind of loss sticks with you. I think it was that shared experience that brought Marlene and me together so quickly. There's something comforting about meeting someone who gets it, who knows what it's like to lose a parent and keep going, trying to build something with what's left. That night, talking about all of it with her, I felt like I'd met someone who understood me in a way that few people did. From that day, things took off fast. We went from talking all the time to full-on dating, and it just felt right. I think I knew pretty early that she could be the one, but it wasn't until her dad died that things got serious. About a year and a half ago, her dad decided to volunteer for the U.S. Armed Forces. He was only 47, still fit, and always had a strong sense of duty. I remember Marlene being torn, proud of him but worried about what could happen. And unfortunately, what she feared came true. He passed away in the line of duty. That moment was a turning point for us. I was there with her through the grief, through all those sleepless nights and the empty days that followed. I didn't want to leave her side, and it felt like we'd faced enough life together to know we could handle more. So, I proposed. I had a solid job, my own life was on track, and it felt like the right time to take that next step. She said yes, and it felt like all the heartbreak and struggle had led us to this point. We got married a few months after that, and I thought we were on our way to building something strong together. But here's the thing. Life doesn't always go as planned. What I thought would be the beginning of our happily ever after quickly turned into something else entirely. It started with little things after the wedding. Marlene just seemed distant. It wasn't like we were fighting, but she'd started acting different. When I tried to talk to her about it, she'd brush me off, saying, "It's just a bad mood. You know how it is." And then she'd pull the classic line, "Just understand me, okay? It's a woman thing." I didn't want to push her too hard, so I tried to let it slide. But I could tell something was off. It wasn't just 1 or 2 days. This mood started stretching into weeks. Every time I tried to check in, to see if she'd open up, she'd get defensive. She'd say she was in a depressive mood and that I just didn't get it. So, of course, I gave her space, tried to be supportive, thinking that maybe it really was just some kind of post-wedding slump. But then something happened that made me start to really question things. We had a night out with friends, and I brought her along. She'd been sulky all day, barely talking to me, giving me cold one-word answers. But as soon as we got there and she started chatting with some of our friends, especially my best friend, who, by the way, is married, her entire mood shifted. She was laughing, joking around, and practically glued to him. I just sat there, watching the whole thing unfold, wondering what the hell was going on. I'd never seen her act like that. That night, I brought it up again. I asked her straight out what was going on, trying to keep calm and focus on understanding her rather than getting upset. But she blew up, accused me of being paranoid and insecure. She said that her talking to my friend was just a way to escape the depression she'd been feeling, that I was making her feel trapped. I tried to ask her what exactly was causing this depression, but she just started crying, saying, "You wouldn't understand. It's too complicated." Honestly, her reaction threw me. I'd never seen her react so strongly, and it just didn't add up. One minute, She's brushing me off, saying it's nothing, and the next minute she's accusing me of being controlling. It was confusing, and it left me feeling like I was losing my grip on what was really going on in my own marriage. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that maybe I was just imagining things, that I was the one overreacting. But something in my gut told me there was more to it. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. The distance between us kept growing, and it was like there was this invisible wall I couldn't break through, no matter how hard I tried. It was around that time I started to wonder if there was someone else. It wasn't something I wanted to think about, but the signs were there. The mood swings, the sudden defensiveness, the change in behavior around other men. I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I started paying closer attention, watching for any clues that might give me a better idea of what was really going on. It was hard not to feel like I was being paranoid at times, like maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, my instincts kept telling me that something was wrong. I wanted to be wrong so badly, but every day, something new would happen. A look she'd give me, a conversation she'd dodge, that would just add to the pile of things that didn't make sense. I began watching her patterns, trying to piece it all together. It wasn't easy, and at times I felt a little crazy, but I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. Then one evening, I got my chance. I heard her in the kitchen, talking on the phone with one of her friends. Usually, their conversations were nothing but a stream of the usual. Who was dating who was doing what at work, and other trivial things. But that night, I thought maybe I'd hear something more. She was talking near the kitchen window, which has a mosquito net, and from the living room, I could catch parts of the conversation. I don't usually eavesdrop, but that night, I figured I'd take what I could get. It started out as expected, just gossip about who was doing what in their circle of friends. But then her friend asked her a question that made my ears perk up. She said something like, "And what about you? How are things going with him?" That was when Marlene's tone changed. She started complaining about things I'd done that supposedly annoyed her, little things I didn't even realize mattered to her. But what came next was worse. She started laughing, this cruel, hypocritical laugh I'd never heard before. She told her friend that she was basically leading me by the nose, and that I had no idea what she was actually up to. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this cold, sick feeling creep over me. I knew, right then, that she was hiding more than just a little distance. She was using me, and she was proud of it. I knew I couldn't just listen to this from the other room. I needed more proof, something I could hold on to, something undeniable. So I came up with a plan. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to act casual, and told her I was going to head over to a friend's place for a couple of hours. She barely looked up, just gave a quick, "Sure, honey," and went right back to her call. After that night, I felt like I'd been gutted. There's no other way to put it. I sat there alone, replaying everything I'd heard and said, feeling the reality settle in like some kind of dark cloud swallowing me up. I thought I'd been a good husband, or at least a decent one. But with Marlene's betrayal, I started questioning everything about myself, about what it means to be in a relationship, to trust someone with every part of yourself. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, about my own judgment, my own understanding of love, and what it meant to be a good husband. But here's the thing. Even if I tried to figure out what went wrong, it wouldn't matter now. No amount of introspection was going to change the fact that she'd lied, used me, and walked away without a shred of regret. That realization sat heavy in my chest, and the only way I knew to handle it that night was by drinking. I don't smoke, but I swear, if I had, I would have gone through an entire pack just to deal with that ache, the one that wouldn't go away. So instead, I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, settled onto the couch, and started pouring. The whiskey burned going down, but it also felt like the only thing strong enough to burn through the knot of anger and sadness that had wrapped itself around my gut. I kept drinking, telling myself I'd stop when the hurt dulled a little, when it felt bearable. But honestly, it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. At some point, I started to feel this pull to talk to someone. Anyone. I needed to get it out, to tell someone what had happened, to make it real by putting it into words. And, I don't know why, but the first person who came to mind wasn't one of my friends. It was Marlene's stepmother, Dana. Maybe it was because Dana had always had this warm, motherly energy about her, something I'd noticed when she'd stepped into Marlene's life after her own mom passed. Or maybe it was because Dana was the one person who'd actually understand what I was going through without me having to explain it. It felt strange to call her, especially at this hour, but the whiskey had blurred the edges of my hesitation, so I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, sounding surprised but not annoyed. "Hello?" she said, her voice soft and a little cautious. "Dana, it's me," I said, my voice thick and slurred with alcohol. "I need to talk to you about Marlene. About what happened." She went quiet, like she was processing what I just said. Finally, she replied, "All right, but what's going on, honey? It sounds like you're a little off. Are you sure you're okay?" "No, Dana, I'm not," I admitted, trying to hold back the wave of frustration and hurt that was bubbling up again. "She's been lying to me, using me. She doesn't love me. She never did." Dana seemed taken aback, hesitating for a moment. "What are you talking about? That doesn't sound like Marlene. Are you sure you're not just overthinking things? Maybe a misunderstanding?" I almost laughed, bitter and hollow. "I wish it were that, Dana. I have proof." I heard her say it. "She was just using me. For comfort, for security, maybe even to trap me with a kid so I'd be forced to take care of her. You don't understand." I heard it all. For a while, Dana didn't say anything. I could almost feel her struggling to wrap her mind around it, probably trying to reconcile the Marlene she thought she knew with the reality I was laying out. But she didn't argue, didn't try to defend her. She could hear it in my voice, that sadness, that raw sense of betrayal, and maybe that was all she needed to know this was real. "Listen," she said softly, her voice filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know what to say, except I'm sorry. This must be. I can't even imagine what you're going through. Maybe we should meet up, talk it out. I'll bring Marlene, and we can all sit down together and figure this out." That idea, though, was more than I could stomach. "No," I said, cutting her off. "Don't bring that witch. I can't. I just can't deal with her right now." With that, I hung up the phone and let myself slip into a restless, whiskey-fueled sleep right there on the couch. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and the remnants of last night's conversation still swirling around in my head. Checking my phone, I saw that Dana had called twice after I'd hung up, as had a friend, though I couldn't remember actually reaching out to him. I groaned, trying to shake off the haze of the hangover, and dialed Dana back. She picked up almost immediately. "Hey, I didn't know if you'd call me back," she said, sounding relieved. "Are you feeling any better?" "Not really," I muttered, pressing a hand to my forehead to try to ease the headache. "But I guess I owe you an apology for last night. I shouldn't have dumped that on you." "Don't be silly," she said, brushing it off. "Look, why don't we meet up somewhere and talk this through? I still can't believe all of it, but I want to hear you out. Maybe there's a way we can make sense of it together." She suggested a little cafe not far from my place, somewhere quiet where we could sit and talk without worrying about being overheard. I agreed, figuring I owed it to myself to get it all out, to put everything into words one more time. When I got to the cafe, she was already there, waiting by the door. She looked elegant, put together, dressed in a way that radiated calm and confidence. As soon as I stepped inside, she came over and hugged me, wrapping her arms around me in a way that felt grounding. "I'm here for you," she whispered, and for a moment, I almost believed that everything would be okay. We found a table near the back, away from the bustle of the morning crowd. She ordered us coffee, and as soon as we were settled, she looked at me with those warm, steady eyes, silently urging me to start. I didn't hold back. I told her everything, from the first signs of Marlene's distance to the night I overheard her conversation. I could see Dana's expression shift with every detail, disbelief giving way to sadness, and then finally to anger. "My God," she whispered when I finished, shaking her head in disbelief. I knew she had her moments, but I never thought she could be so calculating. "I just can't believe it." "But I believe you," she added quickly, reaching across the table to put a hand on mine. "I know you wouldn't lie about something like this." That small gesture meant more to me than I could say. For the first time since this all began, I felt like I had an ally, Someone who understood what I was going through and wasn't going to brush it off as paranoia or insecurity. Dana, I don't know what to do next, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It feels like everything I thought I knew is gone. She took that away from me, and I don't know how to move forward from here. Dana squeezed my hand, her eyes meeting mine with a steady, unflinching gaze. We'll figure it out together, she said softly. You're not alone in this. If you need support, if you need someone to stand by you through whatever comes next, I'm here. I'll help you however I can. I grabbed my car keys and jacket, making it look like I was actually leaving, but once I was outside, I circled back and parked my car a couple of houses down, out of sight. Then I ran back to our house and crouched near the pool, close enough to hear her through the window but out of sight. I pulled out my phone and hit record, making sure every word would be saved. I had no idea what I'd catch, but I knew I needed whatever I could get. For the next 40 minutes, I sat there in the dark, listening to her talk. Most of it was just her friend going on and on about her own problems, stuff I couldn't care less about. But I stayed patient, waiting for the right moment, for Marlene to say something that would confirm everything I feared. And finally, she did. She told her friend that she was sick of me, that she'd only married me because she thought it'd make her life easier. She started talking about how she didn't actually love me and how she was just using me to keep herself comfortable. Her exact words were something like, "He's just a safety net for now. Once I get what I want, he's gone." She laughed again, sounding cold and mean, and added that she was even thinking about getting pregnant on purpose so that I'd be stuck paying her alimony if she decided to leave. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. This wasn't some random woman talking. This was my wife, the woman I'd married, the one I thought I'd spend my life with, and she was here, talking about me like I was nothing more than an ATM she could get rid of whenever she felt like it. I listened for a few more minutes, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Every word, every sentence, only made it worse. The woman I thought I loved was a stranger. All her depression talk, all those excuses she'd given me, it was all a lie, just a game to keep me distracted while she used me for everything she could get. After that, I couldn't sit there anymore. I stopped the recording, shoved my phone in my pocket, and stormed back into the house. I threw open the door and walked into the kitchen, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. She looked up, surprised, and hung up the phone quickly, but I could see from her face that she knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound innocent. I couldn't hold back. "I know everything," I said, my voice coming out harsher than I expected. "I heard you just now. I heard everything." Her face went pale and she stammered, "What are you talking about? You're making no sense." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "I recorded your whole conversation," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Every single word you just said. You're using me, lying to me, and you even had the nerve to talk about trapping me with a kid so you could take my money?" For a second, she just stared at me, speechless. Then, as if on cue, she snapped back to her usual manipulative self. "Oh, come on, you're overreacting," she sneered. "You probably just misunderstood. You have no idea what you heard." I shook my head, my hands still trembling. "No, I know exactly what I heard," I said. "And you know what? You're out. I'm done with you. You're not my wife anymore. I'm filing for divorce, and I've got all the proof I need." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing, and for a second, I thought she was going to lunge at me. Instead, she just smirked and said, "You think you can get rid of me that easily? I won't let this go, you'll see." But I wasn't backing down this time. I stood my ground and pointed at the door. "Get out," I said. "Now, before I change my mind about letting you walk out calmly." After a tense moment, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, I was left alone in the kitchen, my mind spinning with everything I'd just heard. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had fallen apart. And now, all I could think was, what the hell was I going to do next? After we finished our conversation at the cafe, Dana, my wife's stepmother, suggested I come by her place the next day. She mentioned calling her lawyer to go over some options, and that he'd be available at around 3 p.m. to help us map out the best path forward. Dana's confidence made me feel a bit more grounded. I didn't know where this whole thing was headed, but at least I'd be taking action instead of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I agreed to her suggestion, figuring this was the best way to move forward with someone who actually understood the situation from both sides. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly better. I mean, it was the first time in days that I wasn't immediately overwhelmed by anger or that hollow, aching sadness. Dana's support, her listening to me without judgment, it had made a difference. I wasn't exactly okay, but I felt steadier. I made myself a cup of coffee, sipped it slowly, and decided to call her to check in about our meeting. She picked up on the second ring, her tone bright and welcoming, like she'd been expecting me. "Yes, dear," she answered, the familiar warmth in her voice somehow making me relax a little more. "Hey, Dana," I replied. "Just wanted to check when I should head over." There was a pause, then she added with a slight, playful tone, "You can come over now, actually. The lawyer won't be here for a few hours, but we can sit and talk. I think you know what I mean." There was a hint of mockery in her voice, teasing, but light-hearted enough that I found myself chuckling for the first time in a while. "All right, I'll leave in about 10 minutes, I told her, still smiling as I hung up. I threw on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door. My head was still buzzing with everything that had happened, but Dana's invitation had made it all seem more manageable, like this mess might actually have a solution. When I got to Dana's place, she greeted me at the door in a long, silky nightgown. It was one of those things that seemed almost out of place, not inappropriate, just unexpected. The gown hugged her figure in a way that reminded me how much of a presence she carried, even when she wasn't trying. She looked elegant, composed, and yet completely at ease in her own skin. I felt my face heat up, momentarily thrown off balance. But hey, this was her house, and she had every right to dress however she wanted. Trying to keep my thoughts in check, I cleared my throat and asked, "So, when's the lawyer supposed to get here?" She looked at me with a small smile, almost as if she found my reaction amusing. "Oh, not for a few hours," she replied. "2, maybe 3. Why? Is something wrong, honey?" Her words were casual, but there was this undertone that made me a little more self-conscious. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. No, everything's fine," I replied, hoping I didn't sound as awkward as I felt. Dana didn't miss a beat, though. She led me into the living room, gesturing for me to sit down on the couch. "You know," she said, settling into the armchair across from me, "you look uncomfortable. What's bothering you?" I felt the heat rise in my face again, and I tried to keep it cool. "No, it's just everything, I guess. Still trying to get used to this whole situation." I felt my face heat up again and tried to cool it down. "No, it's just everything, I guess. Still trying to get used to this whole situation." 5 seconds after hearing this, she smiled and said, "I know what can help you." After these words, she silently stood up and went to her room. I sat there wondering what would happen now, because it was most likely something you could have already come up with. And what do you think, of course? 5 minutes later she comes back, in an outfit I could not even imagine her in. She takes off her robes and says, "Will this make you feel better?" I sat in shock looking at her, not understanding what the hell I was doing here. In principle, now I understand that there are good reasons for this, because a 40-year-old woman has not had a man in the area for a year and a half, and this situation is not at all strange. Honestly, what she did amazed me. She took dominance over me and asked me to do whatever she wanted, according to her whim. My head drooped so much that I could not even think normally. I have not felt something like this for about 10 years, and my ex-wife was rarely able to do this. She made me feel good for about 5 minutes, then leaned over and said, "You can take it a little higher, baby." I was in shock. We did this for about an hour and a half until the lawyer came, and honestly it was the best medicine. I do not regret what I did because when my wife found out about it, she immediately went crazy and went along with all my conditions that I demanded from her. I think that she realized who lost here, and perhaps that is why everything ended so quickly. And if you look at it that way, she was right that everything would end that day. An amazing woman. A week after that day, I separated from my wife, and Dana asked me for these services more than once. Honestly, I didn't expect it to end like this, and it's for the best, Because if there is justice in the world, it is deserved.